So as I look at these types of problems, I first want to compare. It talks about going from system A to system B. And so with that in mind, I want to compare what's happening with system A compared to, let's say, what's happening, or what's included in system A compared to what's included with system B. And I see that A2 is the same thing as B2. But A1 is not the same as B1. So something happened here. But as I look at these options down here, and this may help clarify the big idea of the problem as well as I talk about this step. Going from A2 to B2, nothing happened. And so this option right here is not an option. Because going directly from A2 to B2, nothing changed. And so there is no, there's nothing multiplied by there to get some sort of change to B2. So that is not an option. As I look at A1 to B1, the option tells me that I've got to multiply something times A1, and that would give me B1. So I look at what changed. So I've got negative 8x and then negative 4x. Well, that is half of 8. And so this would be multiplying by 1/2 to get negative 4x. But as I look at the second part, 7y times 1/2 would be 3.5y. And that's not what I have. And so this right here is not an option either, because I can't multiply by one thing to get from here to there. And so with that, having been able to eliminate those two options, as far as the format of how they are kind of presenting these other two options, what this means is that you multiplied something times the first equation, added it to the second equation, and then this B2 would be your answer. B2 would be your answer. So as I look at that, the problem is B2 is the same as A2. And so this is not going to be a possibility, simply because if B2 is my answer, well, there's nothing to do to A2 to get there. And so adding anything to A2 would not give me that result, because it's not supposed to change from A2 to B2. So from A2 to B2, there is no change. And so adding this piece is not going to do that for me. So I do know that it's this option. Now the next piece is what does this mean, and what is the answer for that box right there? So there is something I multiply A2 by, then I add it to A1, and then B1 is my final answer. So as I look at this, I look at these equations, and I'm trying to multiply everything here by something, add it to the negative 8x plus 7y equals negative 3, and then have this be my answer, is what I'm trying to accomplish. So as I look at how I do that, so negative 8x plus or minus what would give me negative 4x? And 7y plus or minus what would give me just y? And negative 3 plus or minus what would give me 11? And there are different ways to think about this. I think usually the easiest way to do it is by focusing on the last number. Now look at that negative 3. Negative 3 plus what would equal 11? Negative 3 plus what equals 11? Oops, that should be negative. And you can do the math piece of this by adding 3 to both sides. And you should get that it's a positive 14. And that's helpful because I need to make that negative 7 become a positive 14. And how do I do that? Again, I can divide by negative 7 if it's not clear from what we see. And what I find is, actually, that should be a question mark. The answer would be negative 2. So that is what I end up multiplying by. Oops. Give me 4x minus 6y equals 14. And now what I do is I combine, because it says to add the two equations. Negative 8x plus 4x gives me negative 4x. Positive 7y, negative 6y is just positive 1y. And negative 3 and 14 we already know is 11. And that's how I got to that answer right there. So that's the idea with these, is you are simply looking for what transformation is happening. And you can pause and go back to look at that explanation. I'm going to go and move on to the second part. And how do we transform system B into system C? Well, let's look at our equations. So B1 and C1 are exactly the same. B2 and C2 are not the same. But as I look, negative 2x needs to become 10x. 3y needs to disappear. Well, I can't make something disappear just by multiplying by it. And the reason why that's important to know is because as I look at the options, from what I was just describing, B1 to C1 doesn't change. So that is not an option. There's nothing multiplied by B1 to give me C1. Same thing, B2 to C2. There's not one thing I could multiply by in order to go from B2 to C2, because that 3y is just disappearing. So what that leaves me with are these other options. And if you give me 1 second, I need to look at see if I can go back to this. Oh, where did it go? That's not what I wanted. Shoot. I'm sorry. This is oh, there we are. Okay. Go back to sharing my screen. All right, so with this, we have so we said this is not an option because going from B1 to C1, nothing changed. Going from B2 to C2, there's not one thing I can multiply by that would take me from negative 2x to 10x and 3y to being disappeared. And negative 7 doesn't even go into 40. So that is not an option, which means I had to do something to one of these equations and then add it to the other. So I'm looking at these things, and I need the y's to disappear. In order to go from B2 to C2, the y values have to disappear. How can I make that happen? And I look at these y values. The only way you can cancel something out is if they're opposites. So if I want to cancel out a 3y, the other one needs to be a negative 3y. How can I make that become a negative 3y? And that would happen because I would multiply by a negative 3. So if I had negative 4x plus y equals 11, if I multiply by negative 3, that gives me a positive 12x, a negative 3y, and a negative 33. And then, as I go ahead and add the other equation, that should be an x equals negative 7. As I add those, positive 12 minus 2 gives me 10x. Positive 3 and negative 3 cancel out, and negative 33 and negative 7 combine to give me negative 40. And that right there is what I end up with in C2. So with that, I saw this is what I multiplied B1 by. in order to get there. So I'm going to look at, well, I'm going to maybe erase these right here. So I did multiply B1 by something and then added it to B2 to give me the answer in C2. And that number I multiplied by was C3. So I know there's a lot going on in these questions. And so if that explanation is not enough, or if you have questions on that explanation, please let me know, and I will try to give you more detail. Thank you so much.